The space framework came out of a handful of discussions with folks where, again, I was getting a lot of the same questions, which was, how do I measure productivity? Or for folks that had been familiar with Dora, they say, well, I know I need to improve, these 2 or 3 capabilities. How do I measure them and how do I know I'm improving? Like, what metrics should I use? And so the space framework was sort of like a guideline and a set of guardrails that we used to tell people quite often when they said, how do I measure productivity? Now, frankly, this works for almost any complex or creative task. And so the goal is to capture several dimensions, kind of what the idea is you're talking about productivity, and in different ways.
If you're a senior leader right now, you feel it. You have more data than ever, more dashboards, more AI tools, and more noise. And yet decisions aren't getting easier. They're getting harder, heavier, with higher stakes consequences. That's why I wrote Artificial Organizations. Build better judgment, speed, and results by combining human and machine intelligence. This book is not about AI hype. It's not about replacing people. It's not about productivity hacks. It's about judgment. Over the past few years, I've spent hundreds of hours shoulder to shoulder with Fortune 500 CEOs, C-suite leaders, and founders working on real problems under real pressure. Board decisions, strategic bets, talent shifts, even growth bets. Even AI rollouts that actually deliver results, because 95% of them don't. I've been using the same system myself inside our studio, building AI companies from scratch, and in my own leadership routines every single week. What we discovered is simple. AI doesn't transform companies, leaders do. And when you deliberately combine human instinct with machine intelligence, something powerful happens. Decision cycles shorten, trade-offs become clear, meetings turn into decision engines, and you get your headspace back. In this book, I show you how to design your own judgment system, how to turn meetings into digital assets, how to build executive workflows that give you time back to think deeply before making major decisions, and actually how to measure if AI is making you better or simply busier. This book is practical, it's hands-on first principles, built really from the trenches. If you want to lead with more clarity, more speed, and more confidence in the age of AI, this book is for you. You can get it at artificialorganizations.com. So let's go build better judgment together. Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode, and it greatly supports our podcast. Today's guest is someone who's fundamentally changed how we think about technology performance. Nicole Forsgren is a world-renowned researcher, author, and senior director of developer intelligence at Google. Many of you will know her as the co-author of Accelerate, the groundbreaking book that proved, using hard data, that high-performance technology teams don't just ship faster, they drive better outcomes too. For years, Nicole has been at the forefront of measuring what actually matters in software development, not opinions, not vanity metrics, but real evidence, real performance, and real impact. Her latest book, Frictionless, takes that thinking even further. In a world where AI can generate code in seconds, Nicole asks a sharper question. If technology is faster than ever, why does it still feel slow? She explores the hidden barriers, frictions inside teams, systems, and cultures that quietly tax performance, lead to burnout of talent, and stall innovation. And more importantly, she lays out a practical, research-backed way to remove this friction. Nicole's work challenges a lot of the old assumptions that we need to let go of or unlearn about productivity, control, and measurement. It's a great way to rethink how your technology organization can be built. So, Nicole, welcome to the Unlearn podcast. Oh my gosh, it's been so long. It's always so great to see you.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm always excited with your work. It's such thoughtful, well-researched, so rigorous. I always love reading the things that you put out and the stuff that you share, because it really helps me understand better ways to identify maybe this signal from the noise, from the FOMO world that's out there to stuff that's really actionable. So I'm always grateful for the work that you've done over the last few years to really help teams understand or diagnose really challenges that they've got, and then let them create paths forward to get better. So here we are again. This time it's Frictionless, which again, I love the name of the book because it's just like super fun. 7 steps to remove barriers, unlock value, and outpace competition in the era of AI. why didn't you be inspired to go through the rigmarole of writing another book, Nicole?
know,
What was the moment of serendipity or madness that made you go, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this.
I'm gonna do it again. You know, it's funny because it's like I'm not gonna write a book, but I kept having very similar questions asked of me from leadership teams, from exec teams, from engineering leads, from people who are running DevX efforts, you know, developer experience, developer productivity efforts. I was getting like very good, thoughtful questions, but they were also a lot of the same questions and a lot of the same themes over and over again. And so finally I was like, if I write this down, like hopefully we can, like, I just can't talk to that many people, right? My calendar, no calendars accommodate. And so I was thinking, well, if we can find a way to kind of help share what we've seen over, you know, between Abhi and I, hundreds of companies and teams, right? How should we start? What are the steps we should take? What are some of the things that we've seen? And so in that way, this book is a little different from Accelerate, because Accelerate was very much like kind of the synthesis and expansion of a multi-year research program. This is sort of like a good collection of best practices that we've seen work across broad contexts for folks who are trying to think about improving work for developers and now for agents.
Yeah, agents or developers, you know, what's the difference these days? I guess we'll find out on this show, hopefully.
Yeah.
But like you say, like you are, again, you know, you're very thoughtful. You put huge amount of effort into the science of this stuff, right? And I think that's, again, the rigor always is what strikes me. So I love this idea that you're thinking more like a synthesis of experience almost this time. And that is, again, unique because you've spoken to so many of these different companies. You're a great pattern matcher. You know, you identify these, as you say, signals about where teams are struggling because you're hearing these challenges again and again and again. Mm-hmm. And you've made some really nice sort of little models that teams can use to get started. One of them was the SPACE model. Do you share a little bit about what that is and how it can help teams to get started?
Sure. So the SPACE framework came out of, you know, a handful of discussions with folks where, again, I was getting a lot of the same questions, which was, how do I measure productivity? Or for folks that had been familiar with Dora, you know, they say, well, I know I need to improve, you know, these 2 or 3 capabilities. How do I measure them and how do I know I'm improving? Like, what metrics should I use? And so the SPACE framework was sort of like a guideline and a set of guardrails that we used to tell people quite often when they said, how do I measure productivity? Now, frankly, this works for almost any complex or creative task. And so the goal is to capture several dimensions of kind of what the idea is you're talking about productivity and in different ways. So SPACE is an acronym to help me remember. S is satisfaction. So if I'm talking about productivity, right, am I satisfied? Are the developers satisfied with the tool or the experience or the process? P is performance. It's an outcome. What do we know in terms of quality or security or do the tests pass? A is activity. This is anything we can count. This is what most people start with when they think of like lines of code, right, or number of PRs, or number of anything.
Widgets doing widget behavior, exactly.
Widgets doing widgets, exactly. C is communication and collaboration. And so how do people talk to each other or how do systems talk to each other, right? And then E is efficiency and flow, which has a couple of like ways to think about it. It could be like asking a person, like, did you get into the flow? What are the conditions you need to get in the flow? Or it can be kind of end-to-end time. How long does it take to do something? And so within those 5, you always want to measure something with at least 2 or 3 of them, right? You don't have to have all 5, but if all you have is 5 different activity metrics, you're going to have blind spots in other areas. So, you know, like think about efficiency and flow, or so ironically enough, the Dora 4 metrics fit into this. So deployment frequency is an activity metric. It's how many times you deployed. Lead time is going to be an efficiency and flow metric. It's how long it took. Change fail rate is going to be a performance metric because that's like the quality and the outcome of a thing.
Right on.
And then time to restore or time to resolve is going to be another efficiency and flow metric.
Yeah,
so we covered 3 dimensions.
Yeah, no, like what I love about this though, instantly as I was reading it, you know, it's one of the hardest things I think when teams sit down and they even think about metrics. Instantly they start counting things. They go to the activity, right?
Yep.
How many agile teams have we got? How many AI licenses have we got? You know, they just talk about these counting, right? But they
Yep.
don't have a framework to understand what are the other perspectives. So teams, you know, really struggle to see bottlenecks is one thing I experience. Everyone thinks they're doing their bit in the system. They're working as hard as they can. The progress is being made, and yet the delays are sort of everywhere. So how can some of these tools in Frictionless help people identify where work is slowing down and how they can take action?
I love this point. I'll say that I see it quite often, right? And many times what's happening is people are kind of identifying local maxima. They're kind of optimizing for within their corner, and sometimes it's within their scope of control, so it makes a ton of sense. But if we want to like zoom out and think about where bottlenecks are, another way we can think about this is where are our constraints, right? Where do we have constraints that are slowing us down? Sometimes we can surface this a handful of ways, right? You can do it algorithmically, you can do value stream mapping exercises, you can go ask people what they swear at all the time, right? But the kind of key is we want to find things that are slowing things down and really are the constraint, because if we speed something up elsewhere, especially upstream, all you're doing is you're making that bottleneck and that constraint worse. And so some of the tools that we share in the book and in the free online workbook is like asking people questions in ways that can really unblock you really quickly, right? Can help kind of surface what your biggest blockers are. And like it's like 2 or 3 questions, right? And it can be something as easy as surveying your developers and asking them, what's the biggest barrier to your productivity? Let them pick 3 or list 3. And then if you want, like for kind of bonus points, right? Say for the 3 that you picked, and like Google Forms and, you know, Docs will help you kind of do this, or Qualtrics. Of the 3 that they pick, how often is this barrier to you? How often does this block your work? Hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, right? And that gives us a reasonable way to like hunch what some of the blockers are across people and what can really start slowing things down. And that's like fairly quick, right? Surveys are nice because they can be really quick. I will say by having folks list 3, that helps us kind of control against, like if you do an open form, I tend to be fairly quick, I'd put in a couple bullets, I'd be done. Someone else, you might be super eloquent that day and write 1,000 words. Does that mean your blockers are worse than mine? Maybe, maybe not. And so that kind of helps us unlock. And then of course there are a bunch of metrics that can help us, and that's where many times we'll turn to data science teams to do, you know, more advanced analyses there. But like I said, you can even do a value stream map. And many times it's a process that's blocking us, it's not tech.
Right on. Like you were just reminding me, like so many times, I think one of my favorite activities often to do with teams when working with them is actually value stream mapping, because you're constantly in a room where somebody has no picture of the whole system, right? There's always somebody in there who's like, oh my God, I didn't realize I was doing this and it was having an impact on you down there. Like it can be one of the most rewarding and sort of enlightening experiences for a team to go through, because nobody really knows how work gets done end to end. But then I love this, like, again, small ideas where people can do something lightweight but really actionable of just a simple survey, right? Like limiting the choices, but then asking the frequency of the behavior happening, giving them a chance to actually really understand, okay, like I might say the biggest blocker is the tooling, but if it only blocks me like once a month, like is that really, it might be a signal, but it's not a strong one, right? So I think these are all like, again, subtle things for people to listen to when you're sharing is, you can do this stuff simple to start, but it's always good to understand what the behavior is and the frequency that it's happening, because that gives you better signal to make better decisions on, to say, is this just noise, like somebody's upset and angry and they'll just always be that? Versus this is actually a pain point that we need to take action on. And again, that it just shows how quick you can get started with this stuff and get really actually sort of scientific but focused on what really matters. So the other things then I want to get back to a bit is this idea of the challenges around culture and structural problems, right? So technology is rarely the problem, as you just said. It's often
tech is easy, people are hard.
Exactly, right? That's the name of our show this week. But this idea, I think, is really important, right? Because sometimes I think people forget that they are designers of their systems of work. that it's their responsibility to design how work happens, rather than just think it's just engineers designing an architecture. No, your work is an architecture, it's an infrastructure, it's a judgment system, it's a decision-making system. And you're responsible to design that. Again, why value stream mapping is so good, because it exposes the design and helps people understand the bottlenecks. So for when you start to then get into these, both the actual, algorithmic, looking at code commits and so forth on their databases and code repositories, but then the people problems that start to surface, right? So how do you start to broach some of those to make it almost safe for people to talk about, hey, we might have a problem with the system design rather than an individual? Because often that's where the initial focus point is. It's that person is the problem, or that team aren't doing their job correctly, rather than understanding the system is actually designed with a flaw in it. So talk us through ways you've helped teams with that.
Yeah, honestly, I think the best thing you can do is approach it with an attitude of curiosity, right? Because it's not really about judgment. Many times very smart people are making very reasonable and rational decisions for the context, for the time when those were made. And then at some point, context kind of changes. But we don't always know. So it can be really helpful to go in really curious, just trying to understand what decisions were made and why, because frankly, some of the times those are going to hold true, right? The underlying assumptions that I made as an outsider are going to be different from the detail inside. And so that gives me a better point of view and a better mindset to go into questions. It changes how I frame and how I interact with people on the questions, right? Which makes it safer to share information that is even bad, but also what do you mean by bad, right? Many times, I loved your point about kind of decision making. So often what we do is we embed an implied area where we will make a decision based on risk or based on complexity or based on quality or based on something, right? And a lot of things will surround and kind of influence where those decisions get made and why, right? Many times with security and privacy teams, they happen toward the end because that's when they have an artifact that they can kind of wrap their hands around and think about. Now, so that means you have now inserted some type of decision. I'll say, some folks say delay, but frankly, you postponed a decision, which could be incredibly, entirely reasonable. It could totally be the right call. But now what are the preconditions for that? And then you can ask yourself, are any of these conditions things that we can decide or prove or disprove earlier? Or do it in ways that are more automated and less cognitively taxing? Or I think there are several things there, but many times it's even, flaky tests in a flaky test suite, right? Am I just going to resubmit till it passes or ignore it because it's flaky tests? That's a decision point that many times, teams kind of just ignore because, again, very understandable reasons. But at some point that starts to not serve us the way that it was serving us at some point.
Yeah, no, they're just great examples, right? And this is where I get all nerded out, is this idea of moving decisions further up the value chain, or creating mechanisms that give us confidence to have more conviction in a higher stakes decision later down in the pipeline, right? And that is for me the excitement of what all these technologies start to offer us is they increase our confidence in what we're actually investing in, really, to give us greater conviction in the judgment call that we make when the stakes are higher. And
I
fun
love
little example. Yeah, it was funny.
With judgment calls, right? Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. No, the way I think about it, even in a non-technology sort of role, right? One of the things I think that's becoming really interesting with the advent of human plus machine technologies is even when I'm preparing for high stakes meetings, right? So when I go to meet CEOs, I've now created this thing called the CEO bot. And what I do is I try and understand some of the characteristics of, the potential person I'm meeting with. I prepare what I'm going to present to them, and then I basically do a practice run with my CEO bot, where it asks me disconfirming questions, it challenges different perspectives. So it's sort of like unit testing, if you will, my content that I'm preparing to sort of showcase and release to this CEO. So again, when I get to the high stakes moment, I have a lot of confidence because I've practiced, I've had multiple rounds of tests before I'm in the high stakes environment, and I've higher conviction on what I actually want to present because I know it's been through this rigor. So I think, again, this is for me, and talk about it a lot in Artificial Organizations book, this is the new opportunity that these technologies are offering us, whether you're technical or non-technical. These principles are, I guess, the first principles of what we're describing here is you can create an environment where your thinking is challenged, just like when you did your PhD, where people push you outside your comfort zone to get higher performance. And again, for me, like that is the most fascinating part of the work we're doing right at the moment, whether it's in the technology space, if you've captured amazingly in Frictionless, or as we start to get into this human plus machine for higher performance opportunities, which at least I'm trying to capture in artificial organizations for senior leaders to start using these tools. And it's exciting, right?
Yeah, it really is. And I love your point about how you can interact with your CEO bot to kind of like test a bunch of your work. And I think that's some of the power of this, right? Is, people are rightly worried sometimes about, agents just like taking wrong turns, like forget hallucinating. Like if they just decide another thing and it's kind of reasonable, it reminds us, and it kind of, I think, highlights the importance of making the implicit explicit. Annie Duke says that, right? And I like that idea because many times when we make decisions, when we have judgment calls, when we rely on our expertise and experience, it's vibes, right? But like, what are our vibes based on? And we usually have kind of like a rough heuristic or set of ideas about how we want to think about things, or the corners that we want to consider, or the edge cases that are in scope, or the edge cases that are out of scope. And I think one nice thing that we're seeing now with agents, and like new agentic workflows and skills and all that, all of those types of things, is we can have better practice in making that implicit explicit and seeing what happens, and then revisiting later and saying, oh, well, there was this other thing that I tend to think about when I make risk decisions, or when I identify metrics, or when I do something. And so I think that offers like a really good opportunity for us to kind of improve our own judgment.
I couldn't agree more. Like instantly, you're making me think of one of the companies I work with is Progeny. They're probably the US's largest provider of fertility benefits for employees. And one of the things the chief HR officer, Cass, wanted to create was this HR bot. And its specific purpose was to try and help answer these sort of like, I would say, rudimentary type questions that often come to HR, like when's the next public holiday? And all these tasks that can chew up the time of a very small but impactful HR team who are spending work on, time on lower value, lower return, rather than these sort of higher stakes, critical moments where they need to be helping people with like very deep, challenging issues.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that was amazing what Cass did to start is she just made it super simple, right? She set these guardrails around, okay, this is the explicit information window you are allowed to answer. And if you don't know the answer, if you feel like you're guessing or you don't have a very explicit response, your job is to then hand over to a human to take over the actual responses, right? And but what was amazing about this very simple product that they built, instantly they started learning. They saw the questions people were asking. They saw areas where they needed to refresh their HR policies they needed to retire because nobody used them or cared about them. So they could reprioritize literally like the benefits that they offer people internally. It freed up this capacity of their team so the daily routine work could be sort of managed as best as possible. But when anything was creative or potentially critical, they could step in like instantly. And one of my favorite parts was when this new joiner, Cynthia, sort of joined their company, and it was on her third day and she joined one of our calls. And she's like, hi, I'm Cynthia. I've been here for 3 days. I've just spent 2 days speaking to the HR bot, and I feel super well informed about all the things I need to know about how to do, get myself set up and functioning in this job, and it's been great spending time with various different team members to ask harder questions or deeper questions that I never would have been able to ask if I didn't have this bot. And for me, like, that's the excitement around these things. It's understanding the context window, making spaces where it's explicit about how to behave, what it does well, if it's guessing where to hand off, and still keep humans ultimately at the center of all of these processes. And for me, again, that's exciting about what we can do if we're clear about, as you're describing, implicit being explicit, like boundaries around what behavior you expect, whether it's a bot, an agent, or any more of these tools that you start to create. If you defer judgment totally to the machine, you have to be willing to accept the risk of unintended consequences, because the machine will not behave as you expect every time. And again, I think these are the great lessons we're learning, as people start to experience these tools and think about how they can use them in their daily work.
Yeah, I think it's, your point's really good there. I think sometimes we also overemphasize the prevalence or the risk of AI and agents making judgments that we wouldn't like. Not to say that we should minimize it, but I think the corollary that we do minimize is how often people make decisions that we wouldn't necessarily agree with, right? So we already have a bunch of noise in the system. I was talking to a team the other day and they were like, well, how do I measure this? And I want to think about measuring with AI and without AI, and number goes up, and I'm like, I hear you, number goes up. But what if it's just spinning or doing all sorts of bananas things, but a person could do it with a lower number of things? And they're like, well, but more usage of the system. And then someone surfaced this question. They're like, well, but how do we know it's building the right thing? Right? If we hand all of this work over to agents, how do you know it's building the right thing? And I was like, how do you know your engineers are building the right thing? And they're like, oh, that's... And I think sometimes we take that for granted because they were raising a very good point, right? How can we automatically at scale systematically assess whether the things being built are correct or not? That's a very important question and a very hard one. But it's also one that we aren't asking right now a lot of the times. And so,
it's true.
And that doesn't mean we shouldn't ask it, but it means that we should think about applying very similar heuristics either to what we're currently doing, or if we're not, how could we think about porting those back? Because I'll say with Dora, I would get a similar question, which was, so we have my Dora metrics, right? Everything's quick, it's reliable, but what if they're building the wrong thing? I'm like, well, then they're just building it faster and more reliably. And they give me this look like, what? And I was like, that's on you. You need to set the strategy and you need to communicate the priorities. And then the system works. And they didn't like that answer. But it was also I think that's something that we should, think about is there are technical things that we can do, which is testing or, pipelines or architectures. And then there's still a bunch of implied work or correctness or decisions that many times we just assume they are there. And then we panic when we can't check for agents.
Yeah, no, it's great. You're making me laugh a lot. So thank you for that. But I do think it's also another nice callback to your space framework. So while people might measure the technology system and how it's performing, they ultimately have to measure your system of work and how it's performing. Is it creating the things that you want? And like I said at the start, I just think that your space model allows people to look at that perspective. It's a great set of things to look across. And you can apply it to technology work, you can apply it to human work, and I think that's again what makes these things super fun. So looking forward, then, what's the thing you're most excited about? You're back in your new role. What's the mission? What are you hoping to sort of focus on there, and maybe some new things that you're learning?
Yeah. So right now I am Senior Director of Developer Intelligence at Google in the core developer org, and so it's a lot of words that says we're trying to understand and improve the systems that power the majority of the infrastructure across Google properties, which is a great question. It's super interesting. It's hard in all the fun ways. And it's also completely changing out from under us, right? Because we're in this AI moment. I think moment is just going to be like the word that we all hate pretty soon because it's going to last for years. But we're seeing these really rapid changes in agents, right? And so it was like first we had AI, and then we kind of had some AI with scaffolding, and now we have, agents, we have MCP. We're looking at skills. By the time this comes out, I'm sure that there will be like 3 brand new concepts around agents and agentic work. And so how can we think about measuring that and understanding it and improving it when things are changing so rapidly?
Yeah, well, I'm delighted you're the person who's doing that, because I think you're the right lady for the job,
I also have a really incredible team. It's fun because I think we get to ask these really good questions, right? And ironically, maybe space ends up being very, very applicable, right? We talk about this in the book. I would probably add trust. Not to say that trust wasn't important before, but it was less front of mind for the typical developer. It was very front of mind for SRE or sysadmins, right? And I'd done previous work including that for them because they're kind of the last touch before prod. But now that we're having AI in front of us and we're validating all of the time, then trust is kind of more forefront. But so many of the rest of the things still hold, right? We can still ask about barriers to productivity. It's like the flip of satisfaction. We can still ask about satisfaction. We should still be looking at performance outcomes. What is quality? Where is quality along each quality gate, and how does that increase or decrease or change with AI? Numbers, how do our numbers change, right? And I'll say this is an area where it both doesn't matter and it does matter, right? So like number of CLs or lines of code, like whatever, right? It's going to go up and to the right. But also at some point, now we need to start thinking about sheer volume and capacity of our systems in terms of like storage or compute or reasoning, but also all of the systems that support that. Are our test suites able to keep up? Are our build programs, can our CI/CD keep up? Like what are all of the things that have traditionally supported this workflow and have had bottlenecks, but probably we kind of faked it well enough. And now AI just amplifies and accelerates everything. So wherever there was a bottleneck, there's probably a large bottleneck. Anywhere a system was very difficult for a human to use, it will be difficult for an agent to use. And so how can we kind of identify and think of smart ways and good heuristics to kind of identify and move quickly? So I'm super excited about all of the work because I think hard problems are fun.
Yeah, they are. And, that's the reason I suppose we keep digging them up and trying to solve them. But I think the great action, I'm always grateful for you and your team, is that you then also share back what you learn. And that's what helps, the industry improve, us all improve. So folks, go out there, grab it. Frictionless, remove the 7 barriers to unlock lots of value in competitive era in the age of AI. Nicole, it's been great to have you on the show. Always good to hear what you're working on and sharing, and please continue to do it. It's super helpful for us all. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Barry. Great to be here.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or a review, as it helps others find our podcast. For more episode and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.